Because to be honest with you, I spent 25 years high. And in the conversation, I talked about the molestation, I talked about being a pastor, I talked about the divorces, because there were divorces, not a divorce.
Okay.
And one of the things Chantel did with all that was help me to put in perspective and to see that there were effects that I didn't realize that I was having. Because to be honest with you, I spent 25 years high. And only by God's grace, I wasn't an addict.
It's masking.
But,
masking. Yes,
and she said that, you know, because she said when I started dealing with the issues, before the marriage got to where it was, I was dealing with issues that I didn't know I was dealing with. Which she said, you know, once you stop getting high, then it's kind of like paving over a forest. But if you don't keep doing maintenance on it, then the roots start popping up.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we started, you said that the term you use is rape. So I noticed in your conversation you're saying molestation. So my question is, when did you transition from molestation to rape when you shared your story?
When I shared my story,
when did you start saying rape as opposed to molestation? Because you're saying molestation now, but at the beginning of the conversation you were saying that, you know, call it what it is. It's rape.
It's rape.
So I'm just wondering when or if you incorporate the word rape when you are ministering about it, when you are sharing.
Actually, I do.
Okay.
You know, and I think what it is from a mental state. Mm-hmm. Some people may not be comfortable with, and I know that because I've spoken with people and I've said molestation and they seem a little tense. I say rape and it's kind of like,
yes,
like whoa.
Yes.
And so I don't know who all is listening, but I know at the end of the day what the most important thing is for people to. Believe me, I have no problem with saying anything. Okay. You know, okay, this may be bad, but. There's this guy I heard of. I think he exists. Somebody called Eminem, I think.
Oh.
And then there's somebody called Jay-Z. I think something like that, right?
Yeah.
And they had this thing, Renegade. Never been afraid to say what's on my mind at any given time of day.
Okay.
That's me.
What you know about that?
I don't. I'm saying I heard that there might be something. I don't know. I'm just guessing. but really, so that's me. So I'm saying it's not about me being worried about saying my story, but sometimes I've noticed in ministry that where I might want to jump, that sometimes that jump for the person I'm talking to might actually do more damage than good. And so sometimes you have to, it's like in ministry, you can't give someone on milk meat.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
You can't give someone that's on milk, you can't give them meat.
Yes.
So
totally understood.
So I mentioned where I felt in the beginning that it's actually rape, but then I guess switching to trying to be in the flow. But I mean, I can go back to that if you like.
No, I was just curious because I noticed, you know, like I said, in the conversation you were saying molestation. And when you said it at the beginning, it kind of hit me like, you know, this is true. And how many of us say that? Because I say I'm a survivor of childhood molestation. I'm a survivor of childhood rape. I am. That's what it is. I don't think I've never used that term. I've never said it that way, but it's true. It is what it is. I mean, when you get down to the details, it is what it is. When you went down to Atlanta to share your story at this church where you had gotten permission from the pastor and the first lady to do so, you were actually invited to do so. So after the first night that you started sharing, what happened? Well,
all right, so we get there, it's Friday, and there's all these people in the church, and so I get up and begin to talk about why I'm there.
Okay.
Mentioned being molested from 5 to 12. Kind of gave a little detail about the first one because I remember it so vividly, and some awesome things happened. Now, in fact, the senior elder, and I won't say her name since I didn't ask her about saying her name. The senior elder, she stood up and talked about being molested. And her brothers and sisters, and she had never shared that before. She had never spoken about it ever in her life, and she actually got up to share it. And sadly, no men did, but still there were women there that found the courage to get up and speak. and I know I shared the story with you, so I'm not, and I'm wondering if you're trying to get to a certain point.
Just
that
how,
I talked about.
you got to a point where you were able to speak openly about what happened to you. You were invited to share that with the congregation, and it got to a point where they didn't want you to share it.
Well, what happened is, not Bishop, but Pastor Williams, she got uncomfortable. And now I mentioned there are people there, and they invited a very interesting group of people. I mean, there were bishops and just all these folks and people who brought people with them. Mm-hmm. And they even brought some males with them for the conversation. So Friday, which I thought was going well because there was a very good response from the congregation. Mm-hmm. People were there. There were questions because we kind of did a question and answer period as well. There was questions. People had things they wanted to know. Mm-hmm. So we get to Saturday when it's time for workshops. And I get a call at my hotel Saturday morning, and it's, well, Pastor Jackson, I need to talk to you. I think last night was good, but could you tone it down a little bit? And I was like, what do you mean tone it down? She said, well, maybe not give so much detail. We want to make sure that we get God in the praise. And I said, so you want church as usual? Mm. And then she got upset with me, this isn't church as usual. I said, well, listen, you knew what I was going to talk about. Yes. Before I came. Mm-hmm. I read you excerpts from the book that I was writing, and I sent you, so you knew what it was about. I said, and I told her, I said, you asked me to come. I didn't ask you if I could come down. You asked me to come because you saw a need, and you wanted that to take place. She asked me, she said, well, have you ever seen Joyce Myers talk about her incidents? And I was like, yeah, I think. And she said, well, couldn't you do it like Joyce Myers? And I said, no, because Joyce Myers' story is not mine and my story isn't hers, and I'm not Joyce Myers. So this is the way I'm doing it. This is the way it's done. Mm-hmm. It's out there, it's straightforward, it's raw. And even when I talk to pastors about it, I let them know this isn't church.
Yeah, you're not sugarcoating it.
Right, it's not church. This isn't, I grew up in church, right? And since I started getting molested at 5, and I only heard it talked about one time ever in church. I mean, that's here in Atlanta, New York, all the different places I lived, I had never heard it spoken about in church, except one person, Bishop Stephen White now, which is Higher Ground Ministries. Mm-hmm. We were having a ministerial, meeting, and he stopped the meeting, called everybody over into the sanctuary, and he said, God is bringing deliverance right now. And he said for molestation and rape. So there were people going down. Of course, I was standing with the guys like, down there, pray, hallelujah, bless them, Lord. And then eventually I walked down. And I remember him talking to me. I had my eyes closed. And I remember him saying to me, unclench your fist. I had no idea my fist was clenched. And he was like, unclench your fist. So that was the one and only time that I had ever heard it dealt with. That was molestation, rape, male, female, whatever.
And that wasn't Sunday service, right?
No,
this
was a ministerial. We were having a ministerial meeting. This was during the week.
Okay.
But the thing that later, I didn't think about it then, but once I guess you could say my eyes were open and started dealing with the situation, the thing that really bothered me is that there was never follow-up. But that wasn't the path that I guess that it was going. And so for me, being in Atlanta, the church I got licensed into ministry for, to me, it's like, okay, this is perfect. They brought me into ministry. They know who I am. They know how I am. So this is going to be the perfect place to have this conversation. Well, we went on with the conversation. I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll just go home. I said, I'm good. We don't have to do it. Well, but we have people coming today and tonight. It's like, well, but you don't want me to come. You want this person that you want there. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to find somebody that you can bring that's going to give you church as usual, because I didn't come down here to preach. Amen. And so Bishop called me, the late Bishop actually, Gordon Williams, and he called me and he was like, heard you going home. I was like, yes, sir. He said, no, you're not. You're coming back over here. I said, well, I just talked to you. He said, I didn't ask you who you talked to. Oh. He said, you're coming back over here and you're going to do what you came down here to do. God. Now, Saturday wasn't the way we had it planned out, but it was what it was. We got to Sunday morning And he said to me again, you know, you're here for a reason. Do what you want to do. Now, because Saturday didn't go the way it was, I really didn't expect really a lot of people to show up Sunday. So when I got to the church and walked in there were people from Friday, a couple of people that had trickled through there Saturday, and then more people than I knew. And when I got up there at first, I'll admit, I was kind of like, now, I don't want to be rebellious in this house, because I can say I'm doing it my way, but I still have to answer to God. But it was the more I went, and I looked at Bishop, and he kind of had this smile on his face. And from there, I just went and let go. And and the biggest thing about that was, even more important than for me, it was looking at the people that God had placed there and seeing, you know, it's like you ever look and it's like you can see stuff melting off of some people. I'm not going to say everybody in the room was delivered and we all got up and the sun shined through the roof. But what I'm saying is I was able to look at some people who still walked out maybe a little broken, but not as much. And so that part for me was really awesome. But I guess the thing that really messed me up is the fact that you knew what it was. But when we're faced with something that we're uncomfortable with or we're not familiar with, and we get nervous, and that's what because we later on talked, and you know, she apologized for that, and I was like, well, you know, we should do it again, and she's like, well,
like, come on now,
we'll talk about that. That was in 13. We haven't talked about it, but you know, but to God be the glory.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because a part of the Cassie Project, you know, we do Trapped, and Trapped is a theatrical presentation that we do about domestic violence. And the whole purpose was to invoke the conversations in the church around domestic violence and sexual abuse, those hush-hush subjects, those taboo subjects that aren't touched. And when you said that you heard it one time, and that's when you guys were having a ministerial meeting, the question came up during our presentation that we held at Zion Global, and weren't you supposed to be there? I know you were out of town. You were out of town. The question came up, how many times has anyone in this room heard a sermon or heard about domestic violence or sexual abuse in the church? And maybe 2 people said once, and one of which was Pastor Mingo, because he said he had preached on it once, I believe. But I don't understand why that is, and I guess we can go into that on another show, but that's something that's really been baffling me. And you being a man of the church, you being a pastor, you know, how important do you feel at this point? How important, or would you be willing to encourage your, what do you call them, the other pastors?
The other pastors.
Okay, the other pastors.
I've had conversations. I've had conversations of asking pastors, hey, this is a need. You may not be comfortable with it. I'll be glad to come in and talk about it. Or, hey, let me sit down with you, or let me get you some information, or you should bring somebody in, bring in a counselor, bring in someone and have the conversation. Yes. And that's because salvation is whole, right? So salvation makes us spiritually whole. But while being spiritually whole, we also need to be physically whole, right? Because one of the things I found for me was that the enemy was able to use something that I had nothing to do with, but he was still able to use it against me. And I remember when we were talking, I mentioned that it's not as if, I believe this actually, that the spirit of rape, molestation, domestic violence, whatever it is, that's a spirit that once you are thrusted into it, that's a spirit that wants to hold on and ride with you everywhere you go. Now, if there is someone else across the room who has been through that, they have their spirit riding with them. And that spirit across the room can look across this room and recognize, oh, hey, there's a friend. And so that spirit will try to begin to guide you and move you and shake you and hopefully bring you close together. Whether you are the perpetrator or the victim, whatever it is, those spirits try to move you together. And so these are conversations I'm having with them. I'm like, look, while you're getting people whole, while you're telling them about paying tithes, and while you're telling them about the church anniversary and the pastor's anniversary, why don't you tell them about or help them begin to heal you.